Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So here are the group assessment of the ESP Audit Committee Charter that presented by the Group 5 from GEC 2207A for Professor MARDHIAH Dr. Syahrul Ahmad bin Ahmad. So introduce, this is our teams.
Firstly, let me start our presentation to know what is Audit Committee Charter. Audit Committee Charter is a formal document that outlines the purpose, authority, composition and the responsibilities of the Audit Committee. So, what is the matter? Because it serves as a guiding framework for the committee oversight role, ensure clarity and accountability in financial reporting, risk management and internal control. Lastly, it supports the effectiveness and independence of both internal and external audit functions. So, what are the purposes and the importance of this assessment? This assessment has requested by the new Audit Committee Chair, which to assess the ESP Audit Committee Charter to identify weaknesses that could affect ethics, independence and assurance quality. So, why the charter matters? Because it defines authority and responsibilities, prevent overlap between the oversight and management, and lastly, it supports risk-based assurance and ethical governance.
Hi, I am KHADEJA and will be discussing issue number 1, which relate to the risk to Audit Committee independence caused by excessive involvement in management strategy and tactical decision. This issue is important because it affects not only governance structures but also professional ethics, objectivity and the quality of assurance provided to the board. Firstly, based on the Audit Committee Charter, the committee is required to review management tactical and strategic plan, including their implementation process and performance outcome. However, according to the accepted corporate governance and internal audit principle, strategic planning and execution are management responsibility, not oversight function. The role of the Audit Committee should be to evaluate whether proper processes are in place, not to become involved in the decision themselves. When the Audit Committee goes beyond oversight and become involved in strategic and tactical matters, the boundary between oversight and management become blurred. At that point, the committee risks moving away from its independent role and becoming part of the management decision making. This is governance concern because an Audit Committee cannot effectively challenge management if it is already involved in shaping those decisions. Next is self-review trait and objectivities. This issue becomes even more serious when we look at transformation transaction. The Charter requires the Audit Committee to review the implementation of transformation activities and the performance outcome after those activities are completed. If the committee has already been involved earlier in reviewing or influencing those decisions, it may later be required to evaluate the success or failure of that decision it was connected to. This creates what we call a self-review trait, and from an internal audit perspective, a self-review trait reduces the professional skepticism because it is difficult to objectively assess decisions that we were involved in. As a result, the Audit Committee judgment may become biased and its ability to provide independent and unbiased assurance to the board is weakened. Then, we will proceed with ethical and professional behavior impact. From a work ethic perspective, Audit Committee members are expected to act with integrity, objectivity, and independence. Excessive involvement in management decisions compromise this ethical principle. When committee members review outcome of decisions they were involved in, it creates an ethical conflict because their judgment may be influenced by personal responsibility or reputational concern. This also leads to role confusion with the organization. Management and accountability become weaker when strategic decisions are influenced by the Audit Committee and clear lines of responsibility are no longer well defined. Such blurred roles undermine professional behavior and weaken the overall governance structure. Last but not least, governance and internal audit. From a governance and internal audit standpoint, good governance requires a clear separation between decision making and oversight. Audit Committee should focus on oversight of risk management, internal control and governance process. They should not manage or influence operational or strategic decisions, and when this separation is not maintained, governance risk will increase and the risk oversight become less effective. The assurance provided to the board become less reliable. Therefore, excessive audit committee involvement in management strategy and tactical decision compromise independence and create self-review trait. Besides, it also reduces objectivities and ethical judgment, weaken governance and assurance quality. It is a best practice to require the audit committee to oversee, not manage, in order to preserve independent, ethical, and credible assurance to the board. That's all. Thank you.
Next, I will present the recommendations suggested to address the first issue, which relates to the audit committee independence risk arising from excessive management involvement. From the first issue identified, our first recommendation is to clarify the audit committee's oversight role by amending the audit committee charter to clearly separate oversight from management. In this case, the audit committee is allowed to involve in strategic and transformation initiatives in a way that may go beyond oversight. This creates a self-review trait where the committee may later be required to evaluate decision that is previously influenced. Therefore, we recommend explicitly defining the audit committee's role as oversight, review, and challenge rather than participation in operation or strategic decision making. At the same time, management must clearly retain responsibility for executing strategic and transformation initiatives, while the audit committee focus on monitoring risk, controls, and outcomes. By restricting audit committee involvement in management planning processes and requiring all oversight activities to be documented and reported to the board, transparency and accountability can be strengthened. Our second recommendation is to strengthen the audit committee independence through formal safeguard. Even when an audit committee is formally independent, the absence of clear safeguard may cause the members to become overly involved in operational matters or too closely aligned with the management. So to address these risks, we recommend to introducing the explicit independence safeguard in the audit committee charter. This safeguard includes prohibiting audit committee members from engaging in operational decision making and reinforcing expectation of professional skepticism when reviewing the management actions. Additionally, requiring the declaration and management of potential independence threat ensure that the conflict of interests are identified and addressed yearly. This strengthens governance quality by reducing management influence and ensuring that the audit committee can challenge management decisions objectively and ethically.
The second issue identified in the ESP Audit Community Charter is weak ethic and whistleblowing oversight. Although the Charter assigned the audit community extensive responsibilities over strategic oversight, risk management, financial reporting, and internal and external audit activities, it does not assign responsibility for overseeing whistleblowing mechanism. In particular, duties 1 to 3 show that the audit community operates at the highest level of organizational governance with authority to review management's plan and assess the adequacy of the risk management process. However, despite this broad authority, the Charter does not require the audit community to establish, monitor, or protect ethical reporting channels or whistleblowers. This omission is significant because whistleblowing is one of the most effective mechanisms for detecting unethical behavior, fraud, and management misconduct. From a governance perspective, the absence of whistleblowing oversight in the formal charter represents a structural weakness. As a result, the audit community is not formally accountable for ethical reporting oversight, directly demonstrating weak ethics and whistleblowing oversight and deviating from internal audit governance best practice and the IIA's expectations on ethics and governance. Further evidence of weak ethics and whistleblowing oversight can be seen in specific duty 13 of the Charter. This duty requires the audit community to confirm compliance with the conflict of interest statement and the Code of Corporate Conduct. While this indicates awareness of ethical policies, the Charter focuses only on compliant confirmation and does not explain how ethical concerns should be reported, whether anonymous reporting channel exists, or how whistleblowers are protected from retaliation. As a result, ethics are treated as a compliance exercise rather than an actively monitored and protected governance system. Without clear reporting pathway and protections, employees may be discouraged from reporting unethical behavior, particularly when wrongdoing involves senior management. Under the IIA Code of Ethics and accepted governance standards, ethical behavior must be supported by systems that allow concerns to be raised without fear. The absence of such system in the Charter therefore provides further evidence of weak ethics and whistleblowing oversight. From a moral perspective, weak ethic and whistleblowing oversight undermine honesty, transparency, and accountability within the organization. A robust whistleblowing framework allows employees to act with integrity by reporting wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. When whistleblowing responsibilities are unclear, employees may believe that silence is safer than integrity. This weakens the ethical tone at the top and allows unethical behavior to continue unchallenged. Therefore, weak whistleblowing oversight represents a moral failure to uphold universal value of honesty, fairness, and responsibility. From a professional internal audit perspective, weak whistleblowing oversight conflict with the IIA Code of Ethics, which relies on safe and independent reporting channels to support integrity and objectivity. Without these channels, internal auditor may struggle to obtain critical information, limiting the effectiveness of assurance activities. Meanwhile, in the workplace, weak ethic and whistleblowing oversight discourage ethical behavior. Employees may fear retaliation and perceive that management prioritizes performance over ethics, increasing the risk of fraud, management override, and abuse of power. From a governance and risk perspective, whistleblower mechanisms are essential for the early identification of ethical and fraud risks. When the audit community does not oversee these mechanisms, risks may go unmanaged until they escalate into serious financial or reputational damage. In conclusion, weak ethic and whistleblowing oversight undermines ethical cultures, weaken internal audit effectiveness, damage workplace ethics, and increase organizational risk. Addressing this issue is therefore essential to strengthen ethical governance, meet professional standards, and improve overall risk management.
For the second issue, which the weakness in ethics and whistleblowing oversight identified because the Charter does not clearly assign responsibility for whistleblowing oversight to the Audit Committee. As a result, ethical content and misconduct may be handled mainly by management, which creates a risk of bias and weak independent escalation. So the first recommendation is to formally assign whistleblowing oversight responsibility to the Audit Committee by amending the Charter. So by formally assigning the whistleblowing oversight to the Audit Committee, the organization ensures that the ethical issues are reviewed independently. It strengthens independence and aligns whistleblowing oversight with the Audit Committee's role in fraud, risk management, and ethical governance. The second recommendation focuses on protecting the whistleblower confidentiality and right. Confidentiality and protection are critical to the effectiveness of whistleblowing system. In this case, the absence of explicit whistleblower protection in the Charter weakens the ethical culture and increases the risk that fraud or unethical behavior remain undisclosed. This directly affects the reliability of internal control and risk management processes. By requiring the Audit Committee to oversee confidentiality and protection arrangement, the organization reinforces trust in reporting mechanism. This measure encourages employees to report misconduct without fear, which improves yearly detection of fraud and unethical behavior.
So the last issue will be limited explicit alignment with the IPPF. The first evidence of limited explicit alignment with the IPPF can be identified in item 8, which assign the audit committee responsibility to review internal audit scope, staffing, budget, and the audit schedule. This duty gives the audit committee significant influence over how internal audit operates and whether it has sufficient resources to perform its work effectively. However, the Charter does not explicitly state that this decision must be guided by the International Professional Practice Framework or supported by a board-approved internal audit charter. As a result, the adequacy of internal audit resources and scope is assessed without a formal professional benchmark. This creates a risk that internal audit may be constrained by organizational or management consideration rather than being structured in accordance with recognized internal auditing standards, thereby weakening audit independence and professional consistency. So the second evidence of limited explicit alignment with the IPPF can be seen in item 10, which require the audit committee to review and approve a risk-driven annual audit plan submitted by the Chief Audit Executive. While risk-based planning is a core principle under the IPPF, the Charter does not explicitly require the audit plan to be developed in accordance with IPPF standards or under the authority of a formal internal audit charter. This means that although the audit plan is described as risk-driven, there is no assurance that the methodology used to identify, assess, and prioritize risk follow internationally recognized professional practice. Consequently, audit coverage may vary in quality and depth, and the audit community lacks a clear professional framework to evaluate whether the audit plans provide adequate and objective assurance. From a moral perspective, the lack of explicit alignment with the IPPF weakens the organization's commitment to integrity, objectivity, and ethical conduct. Without clearly stated ethical standards, internal auditors may face moral pressure when making difficult decisions, especially when dealing with sensitive or high-risk issues. In terms of workplace behavior, unclear audit authority can reduce cooperation and respect toward the internal audit functions. This may lead to inconsistent behavior, resistance during audits, and a lack of openness from employees, which ultimately affects audit effectiveness. For internal audit, the absence of professional benchmark weakens audit independence and consistency. It also makes it more difficult for the audit community to evaluate audit quality and performance objectively, reducing confidence in audit outcomes. Finally, from a governance and risk perspective, this issue increases the risk of inadequate risk identification and audit coverage. Without strong professional alignment, overall governance, oversight, and assurance provided to the board may be weakened.
Now, I will continue for the next recommendation for the issue limited explicitly alignment with IPPF. So the first recommendation is that we suggest that the audit community explicitly include compliance with the IIA's International Professional Practice Framework, including the Code of Ethics and Standard in the Audit Community Charter. This is to ensure that the internal audit activities are guided by recognized professional and ethical standards rather than informal or management-driven practices. How the recommendation should be implemented? So in practice, this can be done by first updating the audit community charter to clearly mention the IPPF and its ethical requirement. Once this is included, the audit committee should formally review and approve its compliance every year so it remains relevant. And at the same time, the updated charter should be communicated to internal auditor and key management. Everyone can clearly understand the ethical expectation. This is to make sure that this is not just on paper. The Chief Audit Executive should regularly report to the Audit Committee on whether audit activities are being conducted in line with the IPPF. And for the audit impact, this will strengthen ethical consistency, reinforce auditor independence, and also improve the credibility and professionalism of internal audit assurance. As for the second recommendation is that the audit committee should require the implementation of a quality assurance and improvement program or QAIP and ensure that all audit plans are risk-based in accordance with the IPPF standard. This helps to ensure that the audit quality is continuously monitored while audit resources are focused on the organization's most significant risks. And to implement this, the audit committee should first instruct the Chief Audit Executive to establish a formal QAIP that follows IPPF Standard 1300. This program should include both internal review and also the periodic external assessment to evaluate how effective the audit function really is. In addition, audit planning should be based on an organization-wide risk assessment so that the high-risk areas receive priority attention, and the audit committee should then regularly review the result of its QAIP and the risk-based audit coverage during its meeting to ensure the continuous improvement. And the audit impact is that improved audit quality, stronger risk-based assurance, and a more effective and value-adding internal audit functions.
So, the overall conclusion of this presentation is the review of the ESP Audit Committee Charter shows some important weaknesses that could affect Audit Committee independence and good governance. These include letting the CAE handle external auditor fees, not clearly stating what makes someone a financial expert, and giving the Audit Committee enough control over the CAE. So, to solve this problem, the Audit Committee should be given full control over the auditors, clear rules for member qualification, and more authority over the CAE.
And that's all from our group. Thank you.